October 28, 1811. Western Spain before dawn. Lieutenant General Rowland Hill faced an opportunity. A French division, 3,000 elite soldiers under General Girard, sat in winter quarters in a remote Spanish village, believing themselves safe from British attack. The roads were terrible, the distance was great. Wellington's main army was far away. The French thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. Hill had marched his force through a freezing night, across mountain tracks the French considered impassable. His men were exhausted, cold and hungry, but they'd achieved complete surprise. In the grey light of dawn, British infantry and Portuguese cacadores surrounded the village of Arroyo dos Molinos. The French were still sleeping. Their sentries were inattentive. Their general was confident. In the next 2 hours, Hill would execute one of the most successful surprise attacks of the Peninsula War. This is the story of the Battle of Arroyo dos Molinos. The dawn attack that caught the French completely unprepared, the surprise that proved British forces could strike anywhere, anytime, and the victory that demonstrated how superior planning and aggressive execution could destroy enemy forces without a prolonged battle. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're covering Rowland Hill's masterpiece, the perfectly executed surprise attack that captured an entire French division and showed that British commanders could match Wellington's tactical genius. But before we watch Hill spring his trap, before we see French soldiers wake to find British bayonets at their throats, we need to understand the Peninsula War context and why this victory mattered so much. And if you're enjoying this, subscribe. We cover the battles where British forces demonstrated tactical excellence, the victories won through superior planning, aggressive action, and flawless execution. The Peninsula War in 1811 was entering its 4th year. Wellington's British and Portuguese forces had been fighting Napoleon's armies in Spain and Portugal since 1808. The war was a grinding affair of sieges, skirmishes, and occasional major battles. French forces controlled most of Spain, but they were spread thin trying to hold territory, fight Spanish guerrillas, and contain Wellington's army. This dispersion created opportunities for British commanders willing to strike aggressively. Wellington understood these opportunities perfectly. He couldn't challenge the French everywhere simultaneously. They had too many troops, but he could concentrate British forces for sudden attacks on isolated French divisions, strike hard, win decisively, retreat before French reinforcements arrived. This was Wellington's strategy throughout 1811. Attack weak points, avoid French strengths, keep the initiative. Never give the French time to concentrate their scattered forces. By October 1811, Wellington had positioned his army to threaten multiple French garrisons simultaneously. This forced the French to spread their troops defensively, never knowing where Wellington would strike next. One such isolated French force was General Girard's division, stationed in winter quarters around the village of Arroyo dos Molinos in western Spain. Girard commanded about 3,000 men, veteran troops from the 34th and 40th Linear Regiments, elite light infantry, and supporting cavalry and artillery. These were professional soldiers, experienced campaigners who'd fought across Europe. They weren't garrison troops or raw conscripts. They were Napoleon's regulars, and they'd won battles from Italy to Austria. But Girard's made a critical error. He assumed the British wouldn't attack during winter. The roads to Arroyo dos Molinos were terrible. Mountain tracks barely suitable for mules, certainly not for moving artillery and supply wagons. The weather was cold and wet. Winter campaigning was exhausting for troops. Military convention said you didn't launch major operations in November unless absolutely necessary. Girard relaxed. His sentries became careless. His soldiers enjoyed warm quarters and regular meals. The division settled into comfortable routine, expecting no trouble until spring. Wellington saw this complacency and decided to exploit it. He ordered Lieutenant General Rowland Hill to take a flying column and strike Girard's division. Hill was one of Wellington's most trusted subordinates, steady, reliable, and aggressive when opportunity presented itself. Wellington knew Hill would execute the mission professionally. The soldiers loved Hill because he cared about their welfare, earning him the nickname Daddy Hill. Officers respected him because he combined kindness with tactical competence. Hill was exactly the commander Wellington needed for this operation. Hill's force consisted of about 9,000 men, British infantry from the 50th, 71st and 92nd Regiments, Portuguese caçadores and line infantry, British cavalry and a few guns. This was more than enough to overwhelm Girard's division if Hill could achieve surprise. But getting into position required a night march across 40 miles of mountain terrain in freezing rain. The troops would be exhausted. The guns would struggle on muddy tracks. If anything went wrong, if French scouts detected the British approach, if the column got lost in darkness, the whole operation would fail. Hill began his march on the evening of October 27th. His troops moved through the night in complete silence. No talking, no smoking, no fires. Officers enforced strict march discipline. The men stumbled through darkness over rocky paths, cold rain soaking their uniforms. It was miserable. But British soldiers were professionals who understood the mission. If they could reach Arroyo dos Molinos before dawn, they'd catch the French sleeping. The march would be worth it. As dawn broke on October 28th, Hill's lead elements reached the high ground overlooking Arroyo dos Molinos. Below them, the village was quiet. Smoke rose from chimneys where French soldiers prepared breakfast. Sentries walked their posts mechanically, not expecting trouble. The French had no idea British troops surrounded them. Hill had achieved complete tactical surprise. Every commander's dream. Now came the execution. Hill deployed his forces quickly and professionally. British infantry moved into position on the northern approaches to the village. Portuguese caçadores, light infantry trained to move fast and shoot accurately, took positions blocking the southern exits. British cavalry positioned themselves to intercept any French attempts to escape eastward. Artillery unlimbered on the high ground, ready to bombard French positions if needed. Within 30 minutes, Hill had 9,000 troops surrounding 3,000 French, who still didn't know they were trapped. At 6 in the morning, Hill ordered the attack. British infantry advanced into the village, bayonets fixed. The 71st Highland Light Infantry, Scottish soldiers with a fearsome reputation, charged down the main street, bagpipes playing, startling the French completely. French soldiers stumbled from their billets, many without weapons, trying to form up under impossible circumstances. Officers shouted orders, sergeants tried to organise resistance. But chaos overwhelmed discipline. British troops were already in the streets, shooting at point-blank range, driving confused Frenchmen back toward the village centre. Some French units managed to form line and deliver volleys. These were professionals, after all, trained to fight even under desperate circumstances. The 34th Line formed square and tried to break through British lines to the south. Portuguese caçadores met them with sustained fire that tore through the French ranks. The square held for several minutes, but the Portuguese were excellent marksmen. French soldiers fell. The formation wavered. British infantry charged with bayonets, and the French square collapsed. General Girard tried desperately to organise a fighting retreat. He gathered his remaining troops, perhaps 1,500 men who'd managed to arm themselves and form ranks, and attempted to break through to the east, where British forces seemed thinner. It was a reasonable plan given impossible circumstances. If Girard could punch through the British cavalry screen, his division might escape into the mountains and regroup. French infantry formed column and charged. But Hill had anticipated this move. British cavalry, the 9th Light Dragoons, waited in perfect position to intercept the French breakout attempt. As French infantry emerged from the village in column, dragoons charged into their flank. Sabres cut down French soldiers. Horses trampled men attempting to reload. The French column disintegrated under cavalry assault. Girard himself was wounded and captured. With their general gone and cavalry cutting them down, French resistance collapsed completely. By 8 in the morning, 2 hours after the attack began, the battle was over. French soldiers threw down their weapons and surrendered in hundreds. Others fled into the mountains individually, abandoning equipment and weapons. A few units maintained discipline and retreated in good order, but they left behind most of their division. British and Portuguese troops rounded up prisoners, collected abandoned equipment, and secured the captured artillery. The haul was extraordinary. Hill's force had captured 1,500 French soldiers, including General Girard, and numerous officers. 2 French regimental eagles, the sacred standards Napoleon himself had presented to these regiments, were taken. Artillery, ammunition wagons, supply trains, and the division's entire baggage fell into British hands. French casualties, including killed, wounded, and captured, exceeded 2,000. Girard's division had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. British and Portuguese casualties were minimal, fewer than 70 killed and wounded. This remarkable disproportion, destroying an entire division while losing barely 70 men, demonstrated the value of surprise and superior planning. Hill had achieved what every commander dreams of: complete victory with negligible friendly losses. When Wellington received Hill's report, he recognised immediately what had been accomplished. This wasn't just another skirmish or small victory. Hill had destroyed an entire French division through perfect execution of a surprise attack. The planning had been meticulous. The night march had been executed flawlessly. The deployment had been rapid and professional. The assault had been coordinated and aggressive. Most importantly, Hill had achieved tactical surprise so complete that French forces never recovered their balance. Wellington praised Hill publicly and mentioned the victory prominently in his dispatches to London. The strategic consequences of Arroyo dos Molinos extended beyond the immediate tactical success. Napoleon's forces in Spain were already stretched thin across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Losing an entire division, 3,000 veteran soldiers, experienced officers, artillery and equipment, was a serious blow that Napoleon's marshals could ill afford. The French couldn't easily replace these losses. Reinforcements from France were needed elsewhere in Europe. Every veteran soldier captured at Arroyo dos Molinos was one less soldier available to fight Wellington's army or combat Spanish guerrillas who controlled the countryside. More importantly, the victory demonstrated that British forces could strike anywhere, anytime. French commanders throughout Spain suddenly felt vulnerable. If Girard's division could be surprised and destroyed in supposedly secure winter quarters, no French garrison was truly safe. This psychological impact forced the French to concentrate their forces more defensively, reducing their ability to control territory and hunt guerrilla bands. French divisions that had been spread across the countryside now clustered together for mutual protection. This concentration made them stronger tactically, but weaker strategically. They controlled less territory and allowed Wellington more freedom of movement. The tactical lessons of Arroyo dos Molinos were studied carefully by British officers. Hill had demonstrated the critical importance of intelligence and planning. Before launching the attack, he'd gathered detailed information about French positions, strength, and routines. He'd identified the best approach routes. He'd calculated timing precisely. The night march began exactly when necessary to reach Arroyo dos Molinos at dawn. The deployment was pre-planned, so troops knew their positions before arriving. Nothing was left to chance. This meticulous preparation was what enabled the surprise to be so devastating. The battle also showed the value of combined arms coordination. Hill used infantry, cavalry, and artillery in perfect synchronization. Infantry surrounded the village and drove the French from their positions. Cavalry intercepted attempted breakouts. Artillery stood ready to support if French resistance stiffened. Each arm performed its specialized role. The coordination was seamless because Hill had clear command authority and his subordinates understood his intent. This professional command structure was a hallmark of British military excellence. For the French, Arroyo dos Molinos was a humiliating disaster. Elite troops from regiments with proud histories had been caught unprepared and defeated without achieving anything. The loss of the regimental eagles was particularly shameful. These standards represented the regiment's honour. Napoleon personally presented them. Losing an eagle to the enemy was considered disgraceful. Girard's division lost 2 eagles in a single morning, captured by Scottish Highlanders and Portuguese cacadores. The shame would follow these regiments for years. Interestingly, the British treatment of French prisoners demonstrated the professional respect that characterised the Peninsula War. Despite the one-sided victory, British troops treated captured French soldiers decently. Wounded French received medical care. Prisoners were given food and water. General Girard, though captured, was treated with the respect due his rank. This professional conduct reflected Wellington's orders. Prisoners were to be treated humanely. British forces in Spain generally maintained high standards of conduct, unlike some other armies operating in Europe. The Portuguese troops at Arroyo dos Molinos performed excellently, demonstrating the success of British military reforms in Portugal. When Wellington arrived in Portugal in 1809, the Portuguese army was disorganised and poorly trained. Wellington appointed British officers to reorganise Portuguese units, impose discipline, and teach European tactics. By 1811, Portuguese infantry and cacadores were reliable troops who could operate alongside British regulars. At Arroyo dos Molinos, Portuguese units executed their missions perfectly, blocking French escape routes and engaging enemy forces with professional competence. Wellington's transformation of the Portuguese army was complete. The captured French eagles became prize trophies. The 71st Highland Light Infantry and the Portuguese cacadores who'd taken them marched into Lisbon, carrying the standards in triumph. Crowds cheered. Wellington personally congratulated the troops. The eagles were eventually sent to London and deposited in military museums as evidence of British victory. Even today, these captured standards remain symbols of British success in the Peninsula War. Hill's victory at Arroyo dos Molinos enhanced his reputation significantly. He'd been Wellington's subordinate for years, performing competently, but without particular distinction. This battle showed Hill possessed more than just reliability. He could plan and execute complex operations independently. He could achieve surprise through careful preparation. He could coordinate multiple units in combat. Wellington increasingly trusted Hill with independent commands, and Hill continued to perform excellently throughout the war. By 1813, Hill commanded entire corps under Wellington's overall direction. The battle also demonstrated British ability to operate in difficult terrain and weather. The conventional wisdom said winter campaigns were impossible in Spanish mountains. Roads were terrible. Weather was harsh. Troops suffered from cold and wet. Supply was difficult. Most armies avoided operations during winter. Hill proved this conventional wisdom wrong. British troops could march through mountain terrain at night in freezing rain and still fight effectively at dawn. This operational flexibility gave Wellington enormous advantages. The French never knew when or where British forces might strike. For British soldiers, Arroyo dos Molinos was the ideal battle. A night march, uncomfortable but not particularly dangerous. A surprise attack, exciting and relatively safe. Complete victory, satisfying and morale-boosting. Minimal casualties. Everyone survived to tell the story. And substantial loot. French equipment, supplies and personal belongings that British soldiers could claim as spoils. The men loved Hill even more after this victory. He'd marched them hard but delivered a triumph that cost few British lives. The tactical perfection of Arroyo dos Molinos stands alongside the best British victories of the Peninsula War. While battles like Salamanca and Victoria involved larger forces and had greater strategic impact, few matched Arroyo dos Molinos for pure tactical excellence. Hill had achieved what every commander wants: complete surprise, overwhelming victory, and negligible casualties. The execution was so perfect that French forces never had any chance to fight effectively. The battle was decided before the first shot was fired, decided by Hill's planning and the professional execution of British and Portuguese troops. This victory represented British military virtues at their finest: meticulous planning, aggressive execution, professional discipline, combined arms coordination, adaptability to difficult conditions. These were the hallmarks that made British forces so effective throughout the Napoleonic Wars. Hill and his troops demonstrated every one of these qualities at Arroyo dos Molinos. The battle remains a valuable teaching example for military professionals studying surprise operations. Modern staff colleges still study Hill's operation when teaching surprise attacks and night movements. The principles are timeless. Gather intelligence, plan meticulously, maintain security, coordinate multiple elements, execute aggressively. Hill followed these principles perfectly in 1811, and they remain valid today. For British pride, Arroyo dos Molinos represents excellence achieved through careful preparation and bold execution. This wasn't a victory won by superior numbers. Hill's 9,000 faced 3,000, but the disparity wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't won by technological advantage. British and French both used the same weapons. Victory came from superior planning, better training, and more aggressive execution. Hill identified an opportunity, planned the operation carefully, marched his troops through difficult conditions, achieved complete surprise, and destroyed an entire French division with minimal losses. This was British professionalism at its peak. The battle also demonstrated the quality of Wellington's officer corps. Hill wasn't unique. Wellington had multiple subordinates capable of independent command and tactical excellence. When Wellington trusted commanders with missions and gave them operational freedom, they delivered victories like Arroyo dos Molinos. This depth of competent leadership was a British advantage throughout the Peninsula War. The French had capable generals too, but Wellington's army had an entire cadre of reliable commanders who could operate independently and achieve results. If this is the kind of military history that interests you, battles won through superior planning and execution, victories that demonstrated British tactical excellence, moments when preparation and aggression proved decisive, then you know what to do. These are the stories of British military professionalism at its finest. These are the examples that still teach valuable lessons about how to plan and execute military operations. Thank you for watching Britain's history, the battles that proved British excellence through planning and execution, told the way they deserve to be told.